see there's already loads of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go back a little bit. And one thing I already want to say is from these two talks, you can already see there's two very different ways to approach public engagement. And you could suggest one is slightly more academic and one is more, really trying to get information to people who don't know anything. And at the same time, you can say they both are getting people information who don't know anything. So you're reaching rural people who may not know about health and people in cities and rural areas who don't know how to identify the spiders. So it's a lot about spider bites and snake bites. Try to find the questions. There's so many. It's gone really far up on my, so here we have, actually, this was a really interesting comment from Timothy Jenkins about the posters for the snake bite. And so here's a question for Birta and Dorothy about taking into consideration color blindness in your color choices, because you had red and green for the positive and negatives. And I just wonder if that's something you thought about when you were creating your designs.
Thanks. That's a very, very helpful remark, actually. So this is something that we can also take back if we talk to focus groups and check on that. But actually, this is something we should consider. Thanks for the remark.
And what's really interesting, even for you doing conference posters, there is a color blindness generator online where you can put any materials or a PowerPoint and it will identify color blindness. There's actually a color blindness awareness week coming up, I think in the next month. So I thought that was a really interesting comment when we're making our materials. And there's another question again for Dorothy and Birta about how do you plan to measure the impact of your health education program? And all the other speakers, so the presenters can think about that as well. If you want to think about impact in general, if you would like to mention how you measure the impact of your individual programs you're running, or your social media you're running, or your children's books you're working on. Anyone can mention that, but let's start with Birta and Dorothy.
Would you like to answer that question, Doro?
Yes, I'm going to answer it. And so how we are thinking of measuring the impact of the IEC materials that we're sharing with the communities is to really, because this program is really a long-term program that has very many elements to it, is to really go back and check and see, number one, have they adapted any of the prevention measures that we have proposed in the poster? So for example, have they cleared the bushes around their houses? Are they trying to keep their firewood and their water out of the house and their animals as well? Are they trying to wear shoes? And then of course, just talking also to the healthcare providers and seeing if there's an increase in the number of health-seeking behavior, number one. And number two, if they're really following the first aid measures. And of course, number three, if all these things are followed, then there will be a reduced incidence of snake bite cases. So I think if we measure all these things and go back and look at all these things, it's easy for us to actually infer an impact to the materials that we are sharing.
Okay.
Yes, and if we talk about this use on social media, of course, you have possibilities to go into the statistics and then see how many impressions you had, how much the content was engaged with, how many times it has been shared. So this also gives us some tools to measure the impact, in social media, on social media.
Do any of the other panelists want to just talk about assessing their initiatives? I know we haven't heard from everyone yet, but I think it's a vital and important question, because sometimes we do public engagement and we get information out there, but we don't have any way to track it and see if it's resulted in behavior change. Like Caitlin, do you think there are people you've met who are really no longer afraid of spiders because of your app or your work?
Well, I guess that's something that's like, you can't really get it out of a statistic, but I do get a lot of feedback in the form of personal stories and people who come back time and time again to tell me how they're going. And absolutely, I think both through the app itself and talks and other work that I've been involved with, you can see the change in people from the first time you engage with them to perhaps the second or third time when they come back and say, well, you know, I used to be arachnophobic and now I've named all the spiders in my house and we're best friends. So those changes do happen and they're wonderful to hear about.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. And when we're talking to a group of scientists like we have here today, people want data. But again, from social sciences, there's a lot of power in stories and accumulating those stories and comments over time, which is also something we can see on social media on posts like, oh, that's so great, we have this information now we know what to do. And then if you do get a follow-up from that person, it's even more powerful. We have a couple of questions about the app here, actually. Oh, this is a very long question. Did you seek out particular habitats to show more medically significant species that people come into contact with? Or did you decide to just take as many different habitats as possible to get a broad sample?
So the initial release of the app, we very much focused on what we thought people were going to come into contact with and what was going to be directly important to them. So that was very much about, okay, so we definitely need to feature the Sydney funnel web and the redback, which are the ones that people are thinking about when they're worried about you know, medically significant spiders. And you know, we need to feature the white-tailed spider, which is one of the Australian ones that has big myths all around it. People are terrified of it, but is actually, you know, really misrepresented. The second wave, I suppose, we kind of did a lot of work on it. We expanded how many spiders we could include. Then I made an effort to include things that were from sort of further away from people and more interesting habitats and a bigger selection of the spider biodiversity. And that meant that I was able to, select from more habitats that were less directly relevant to people, but will give people a better idea of what was actually out there.
Okay, there are many comments saying how wonderful you all are. And so another comment is, actually, I think with Doro and Berta, you mentioned, you know, translating your posters into many other languages, which I think is fantastic. And I'm just, and then there's a question to Caitlin as well. Are you planning to get your spider app in other countries for other taxa? And so I just would like you to comment, maybe for Berta and Doro first, the challenges of getting your information translated and thinking about the cultural implications of how you design your posters for different countries. And then Caitlin can be thinking about the same question of how she might go forward with her app.
Yeah, so what we already touched upon is the fact that we developed those posters based on scientifically proven recommendations or interventions. And then we try to break it down into an easy to understand language, which we also do when we translate it into other languages. And in regard to the design, we have those focus groups where we present different comic styles or different posters. We also now had a change of the design with the prevention poster. And we're still working on the version for Latin America, where we will also adapt the graphics to, so people in snakebite affected communities there can relate more to them. So actually, yeah, it's a process of really engaging and discussing and asking people.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, I know you mentioned it a bit, but there's nothing, it's really important to reiterate that we can't just create these materials and give them to people. You have to have that feedback process. You have to be able to alter them, change them, and it might be slightly different things in different countries, even down to the way a color is accepted in one country versus another. So I think that's really important work. Caitlin, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, I would love to be able to expand Spidentify out into other countries for spiders, but also, for other groups of animals. It's for that one, it's a funding thing, I suppose. So we funded this from a small business, a small invertebrate education business. And that was quite I'd say a really fascinating experiment something to say, can like a field guide be like commercially viable for a small business to produce? And the answer we got out of that was yeah, but then to expand it out to other countries, that's we are looking at funding options for that, sort of on the back burner. But yeah, it would be terrific to be able to repeat that same process for other areas of the world that are really interested in their spiders and also don't have the information.
So from there, I think if there's anybody that's watching today and you're a photographer and you would like to go up and down your country and take Caitlin hundreds of photos of spiders, maybe you can have an amazing collaboration. Okay, I'm going to stop the round table section for now. I'm going to move on to the next two talks, and then we'll still have a good amount of time at the end, just so our other two superstars get their chance to tell about their amazing engagement. So Staren is next, and then she'll be followed by T.